Hello, good day. This is Jove Aguas, and welcome to my lectures in ethics. And the topic of our discussion today is John Rawls' theory of justice. So, introduction. John Rawls is a contemporary American moral and political philosopher in the liberal tradition. He is relatively current in the sense that he died only in 2002. So he is one of the more current or contemporary American philosophers. John Rawls is known for his theory of justice. He proposed this theory of justice, which tries to use the strength of both the consequential and non consequential ethics. Um, in our previous lectures, we have already defined what we mean by consequential or consequentialist ethics. It means that this kind of ethics base the morality of an action on the consequences or the outcome of an act or of a rule. The non-consequential, you call that the ontological theory, base its ethics on certain rules. Example of these would be the divine right or the divine command theory, the social contract theory, etc. So the theory of John Rawls falls within the domain of distributive justice. And distributive justice means that what is ethically correct, or it defines what is ethically correct way to distribute the benefits and the burdens of society. So, how do we distribute the benefits and the burdens of the society? That is the domain of distributive justice. And the theory of Rawls falls within this category of justice. So, John Rawls hoped to offer a workable method for solving the problems of our society, or meaning the moral problems of our society. And one of these problems is, of course, social injustice. Okay, meaning the distribution of the benefits of the goods. So his theory is based on a thought experiment. Okay, it's a thought experiment on how people will conceptualize a just society. So he was thinking, how would people formulate rules that will somehow make their society just and fair? So that's the motivation of John Rawls for proposing this theory of justice. So his theory attempts to maximize the lot of those who are minimally advantaged, meaning those who are disadvantaged, to maximize of course, to maximize their benefits, despite the fact that they are disadvantaged. That's why the principle or the theory of justice of Rawls is sometimes called the maximin principle. Maximum, minimum. Okay, to maximize the lot of those who are minimum or minimal, those who are below. Right. So that's the whole idea, the general idea of the theory of Rawls. So the ideal or the most fundamental idea of the theory is a society with a fair system of cooperation among free and equal citizens. So you can already see here the basis of an ideal society. It's a society where the members are free and equal. But of course, we're going to define what he meant by equal and free, right? So Rawls claims that this ideal, with its component ideals of fairness, freedom, and equality, is implicit in the public political culture of a democratic society. So again, we know that it's American, and of course, the idea of a democratic society of Rawls is based on his experience of a democratic society like America. Right? So, this ideal, according to Rawls, based on his theory, will be realized through justice as fairness. Justice as fairness. So it's very important. Okay, justice as fairness. So what is justice as fairness? Justice as fairness tries to formulate principles of justice, whose realization, meaning when it is realized in the social institutions, would make a reality of this ideal of a society that is fair to all its citizens who are free and equal. So there are many elements involved here. One, that the citizens of that society are free and equal, and that society will only be realized if these members of the society can formulate principles, right? Can formulate principles of justice. And of course, what would be those principles? Those principles must be based on fairness. Okay? So, justice as fairness regards, first of all, citizens as free and equal. Now, you can ask, how about if citizens are not free and equal? Well, then that justice as fairness will not be possible. But remember, this is a thought experiment, meaning he's talking of an ideal society. So, what does it mean by equal or equality? The citizens of the society, or the members of the society, are equal in that each citizen has two moral powers. So they are equal in the sense that they have two moral powers. First, they all have the capacity for a sense of justice. Okay, that is the capacity to understand, apply, act from the principles of justice. So that's the capacity of sense. Everybody, I would suppose that even in the poorest, no, sectors of our society, they every person has that sense of justice. They know what is fair, and they understand, and they can act and they can apply given the opportunity to be just. Right. The second is the capacity for a conception of the good. What is good? No? What's good for me and what's good for everybody? There is a capacity to form, revise, and rationally pursue a conception of what is valuable in life, what is good, worthy, and valuable in life. So this is the meaning of equality for all. So it's not equality in terms of, say, wealth, in terms of power, in terms of education, and so on and so forth, because in those things, there are actually inequality. But at least we are equal because we have these two moral powers, a sense of justice and a conception of good. Okay. Now, so for Rawls, the theory of justice as fairness is a hypothetical, not real. Okay, it's not a real moment, but still a doable thought experiment. So it's, remember, it's a theory. So it's doing a thought experiment. So it may be hypothetical, but according to Rawls, it is a doable thought experiment. Meaning, well, it could be an ideal society, but it's a doable. It's a realistic ideal, so to speak. So let's start with the basic concepts of Rawls. The first is the original position. What is this original position? Imagine a natural state of nature, similar to luck. Okay, so luck, before the uh, establishment of the civil society or the civil state or the state, there is the state of nature, the natural state, where really there are no uh, civil social laws, etc. Right? So it is for Rawls, it is a hypothetical state of nature in which all the members, all the people, are ignorant of their talents and of their socioeconomic conditions. All right. So this is the original position, meaning this is the pure, the primitive position. where everybody are just aware of their capacities, but not necessarily their talents or skills or of their socioeconomic conditions. Right? So that's the hypothetical state of nature, similar to luck. No, in the state of nature of luck, well, we only enjoy the basic the basic rights, right to life, right to liberty, right to property, but there are no governments. Okay, there are no governments, no schools. Okay, no other institutions, except that people are just there living side by side. Well, people are good, they respect one another, but of course, eventually it will create some conflicts of interest. But that is the natural state. That's the original position of Rawls. So he claims that in the original position, people share certain characteristics. They are mutually self-interested, meaning, of course, they have to be they have to work for their own personal interest, but they are rational, meaning they more or less know their interests, and of course the interests also of others. They also have similar needs, they have similar interests, and they have similar capacity. So all being equal in that sense, in the original position, equal in the sense that, well, equal or similar, in not necessarily equal, but similar in the sense that they have similar interests, they have similar needs, they have similar capacities, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's a moment when people know nothing about their future. Okay, they don't know what's going to happen in the future. All right, so people are behind what Rawls calls the veil of ignorance. Veil, veil of ignorance. So it's not that people are ignorant, but there's some kind of a shield that prevents them from looking forward, meaning from looking what is behind. It's like a smoke screen, right? You don't know what's in front. All right. So they have this veil of ignorance. All right. So there is no class of social status. And based on this original position, they will try to formulate their own rules that would be fair. So given that original position, they don't know what's going to happen. They only know what are their interests and needs and capacities. They will try to formulate rules that would be fair for everybody. All right? And that will be the basis of their future ideal society. Okay? So the principles of justice and the institutions they imply characterize an ideally just but practicable society, a realistic utopia. What I mentioned a little earlier as a realistic ideal. Okay, a realistic ideal. Okay, so well, it's an ideal society, but it's not too ideal that it cannot be achieved. Now, people have this idea of utopia as an ideal state that can never be achieved, but Rawls was talking of a realistic utopia. Okay, so I hope you can see this. So this is well, I got this from the internet. So imagine these are the people in the original position. Okay, so they are equal. They have no idea about their future lives. Okay, and there is the veil, the shield of ignorance, which prevents them from knowing what's going to be in the future. So among themselves, they are asking, what rules are we going to formulate? I don't know if I will be man or woman. What about jobs and pay, etc., etc. So because there is that veil or shield of ignorance. Okay. So based on this original position, they're going to formulate their rules. They will make choices. They will make exercise their freedom, of course, their reason to make rules. And this rule should be fair. Okay? It should be fair and it should be agreed on by all the members in that group. That will define the ideal society. So if this is the original position, These are the circumstances. There's the veil of ignorance. And this is the goal. They will have to make rules so that their society will be just and fair. All right. So Rawls asked, what would be the general rules? All right. And he said, these are the general rules: equality, all right, and uh, social economic inequalities are just only if they produce compensation or benefit. And he formulates these rules, okay, these two rules, and these are now the two rules. So the liberty principle and the difference principle. Okay, so we'll go back to that. So in the original position, Rawls assumed they will formulate a fundamental principle that would ensure justice for all. So the first principle is the liberty principle. Okay, in his book Theory of Justice, he said each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive scheme of equal basic liberties compatible with a similar scheme of liberties for others. What does that mean? We're going to explain that later on, right? So the second principle he calls the difference principle. And in the book Theory of Justice, he writes, and I quote again, social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they are both A, reasonably expected to be to everyone's advantage, and B, attached to positions and offices open to all, meaning to everybody. Okay, so let's explain these principles, these two principles, one by one. So the first is the liberty principle. People in the original position would expect each person participating in a practice or affected by it to have an equal right to the greatest amount of liberty that is compatible with a like liberty for all, meaning everybody should have liberty. Okay? Greatest amount of liberty. I already mentioned that in John Locke's theory, in John Locke's philosophy, one of the basic rights, okay, of the three natural rights is right to liberty or right to freedom. The two others are, of course, right to life and right to property. So, what is the meaning of this principle? The basic liberties for all citizens are this: one, they have political liberty, meaning they have the right to vote and be eligible for public office. They have freedom of speech and assembly. They have liberty of conscience and freedom of thought. Of course, that will include freedom of worship or freedom of religion, freedom regarding their own person, okay? The right to hold personal property, right? I already mentioned that. No? Then freedom from arbitrary arrest and seizure, as these are understood under the rule of law. So these are the basic liberties of citizens. Okay. Hopefully, I don't know if in our present situation now we enjoy all these basic liberties. Right. So what is equality? For Rawls, equality does not mean that all are the same. No, that if you give a family one sack of rice, that all families, regardless of whether they are rich or poor, they will receive one sack of rice. That's equality. But that's the same. But that's not equality. For Rawls, equality means the impartial and equitable administration and application of rules that define a practice, meaning based on practice. So equality is the equitable, and equitable is not the same. I mean, uh, if you have, let's say, six or five children, and you're going to give them allowance, because they are of different ages and different levels in school, are you going to give them all equal, allowance of 100 from the grade 1 to the college? That's not equitable, right? So equality for Rawls means the impartial and equitable, application of rules. So the equal liberty principle expresses the conception of impartial equality, which means The spirit of disinterestedness that should characterize the distribution of goods and burdens of evil, the fact that no person should receive preferred consideration, right? So equality means that nobody will have the advantage. I mean that because you are close to the mayor or to the barangay captain or you voted for this, therefore you're going to have preferred consideration. No, there's it should be a spirit of disinterestedness, right? So that's the equality, the one expression of the equality principle. So equitable administration means that the distribution of any benefit or burdens must be fair and just to begin with, right? No palakasan, okay? No barkada. I mean, it should be, fair and just from the very beginning. So, if this person received this the form from the DSWD, then everybody should receive a form, okay? From the very start, from the very beginning, right? All right, so the equal liberty principle decrees that everybody be judged by these criteria. Okay, so no preferential treatment. Okay, from the very start. But the equal liberty principle expresses the idea of equality in another and more important way. Okay, and it is an intrinsic part of all regulations. That is that they infringe on personal liberty. They infringe on all regulations. They always infringe on our personal liberty. There will always be, because when you try to formulate a rule, for example, it's always a consequence of the rules that your personal liberty is affected, right? Like for example, well, the regulation is you cannot go out of the house during the ECQ, but it infringes on your personal liberty because you want to go out, but you cannot go out. Okay, so in his equal liberty principle, Rawls recognizes this inherent characteristic of laws and other practices that by nature, rules or laws, they encroach on the equal liberty of those subject to them. This ECQ is a perfect example of this encroachment, right? You wanted to go out, you cannot go out. You want to do this, you cannot do. So it's an intrinsic inherent characteristic of a laws, right? You cannot do as you please. So to address this, Rawls proposed the second principle, and that is the difference principle. Okay? So what is this difference principle? People in the original position would allow inequality. Okay? It will allow equality. In only insofar as it serves its person's advantage and arises under conditions of equal opportunity. Okay? Equal opportunity. So it's qualified, no? Not equality for all, but equal opportunity. So if there is inequality, we can allow inequality only if it will benefit certain people, meaning it will serve its person's advantage, and it will arise under conditions of equal opportunity. So by person does not only mean individuals but also collective agencies. Right? So it does not only apply to individual persons. No, and practice means any form of activity that a system of rules specifies. Like, for example, the offices, roles, files, duties, etc., etc. So that's the meaning of practice. Meaning, okay. So, in the application of laws, there will always be some inequality, right? Like, for example, you say, well, okay, social distancing, say no public transport. But there will always be some inequality here because if there's no public transport, then people with private cars they can go out. The poor, because they don't have private cars, they cannot go out because there's no public transport. You can see this. You can see this. In what is happening in our society right at this very moment. All right. So crucial to any theory of social justice is the determination of when inequality is permissible. When inequality is permissible. After all, a just society is not one in which all are equal, as we have said, but one in which inequalities are justifiable. So to address this problem, Rawls again offered, as I've said, the difference principle. So Rawls' difference principle defines what kinds of inequalities are permissible. So you cannot uh, allow, permit all kinds of inequalities, but only certain kind of inequalities. And it specifies under what conditions the equal liberty principle may be violated. Okay, because uh, Rawls did not really specify what are these inequalities, but what he's trying to provide here is the principle, how these inequalities can be permissible. So for Rawls, equality is not contingent, meaning equality is necessary, and it does not depend on something else like the greatest happiness for the most people for its justification. Meaning there should always be equality, right? But as we've said, although equality is fundamental and self-justifying, it does not mean that equality can never be violated because in reality it is actually violated. All right, there is inequality, but the question, the concern of Rawls is what are the inequality that we can allow, and what are the conditions under which this inequality can be permitted. So it means that inequality is permissible only if, so this is the condition of Rawls, only if, in all likelihood, the practice involving the inequality works to the advantage of every individual affected, or, and this is very important, to the advantage of the least well off. The advantage of the least well off. All right. So let's say, for example, the distribution of relief goods. Should we give all? Should we provide all people, meaning all families, of the relief? Of course, equality demands that everybody should be given. But in this case, we can violate this inequality that we are not going to give some people, some families. All right, under what condition? That it will benefit the least advantaged. It will benefit the poor. So why give the rich? They already have plenty. So we can violate the inequality by giving more to the poor because they are the least well off. See? So if, for example, okay, uh, we're going to provide free transportation, but we can violate that equal provision for for free transportation. We're going to prefer certain people. So we are violating now the equality principle. But we're going to give that the free ride to the frontliners because they are the one that is mostly affected, right? They are the most affected people. They're risking their lives. And therefore, we have to arrange the inequality in the sense that the least and the most affected benefit more from the inequality, right? So these are some conditions you know that will allow the difference principle. First, holding positions of authority and offices of command is open to all, meaning no hereditary position. So we are talking now in general sense. No hereditary positions. Sorry, in politics, I don't know if this is being practiced in our country. Obviously not. No hereditary positions. We have a counter example of this in our society, right? No exclusions based on gender, race, etc. We have a counter example of this in our society today. There's so much, you know, uh, injustice, um, exclusion based on gender and race. and no test based on wealth or property. Oh, come on, right? So we have good examples, but these are counter examples. And then we have to arrange social and economic inequalities so that everyone benefits. And Rawls arranges inequality so that that, that ideally they benefit all the affected, or at least those most in need or least advanced. I already mentioned some examples here, uh, based on our conditions right now of the ECQ. So the question is, who are the least advantaged? Again, we are talking now in the general sense. So these are those with lowest expectations for or access to primary goods. What are these primary goods? These are what free and equal persons need as citizens. So let's be more specific. What are the primary goods? Okay, so those who lack access to these goods are the least advantaged. So what are these? Specified five kinds of goods which are basic and primary. One, basic rights and liberties, freedom of thought, liberty of conscience, freedom of movement, free choice of occupation, powers and prerogatives of offices and positions of responsibility, right? Income and wealth. So if you don't have access to income and wealth, then you are already least advantaged. Social basis for self-respect, meaning the aspects of basic institutions normal essential if citizens are to have a lively sense of their worth as persons and advance their ends with self-confidence. Now, if you are persecuted, if you are being bullied, see, so there are many examples to these kinds of goods. And if you don't if you don't have access to these goods, then you are disadvantaged. And therefore, when the rules are formulated, when inequalities happen, they have to be considered. See, so let's take for example the basic liberties, basic rights and liberties. Well, the poor they don't have access to this. All right, mamatay na lang sila. They don't go through the due process. All right. So how do we allow inequality? Well, what is happening in our country is actually the opposite. The poor are killed, the rich are given due process. See? And so we are very far from this ideal. But anyway, that's an ideal. It could be realized if we follow, according to Rawls, if we follow these principles. Right? So, last point, the notion of reciprocity. Reciprocity is the principle that requires that a practice be such that all members who fall under it could and would accept it and be bound by it. Meaning, if you are part of that community, of that society, and you institute these rules, you promulgate these rules, then you have to accept it and you have to be bound by it. It should be a rule for everyone, right? No one should be above the law or outside of the law, right? So that's the principle of reciprocity. It requires the possibility for mutual acknowledgement of principles by free people, having no authority over one another, because we share the same basic rights. And this makes the idea of reciprocity fundamental to justice and fairness. And this time of ECQ, I think we need this reciprocity, this idea of reciprocity. Without this acknowledgement, there can be no basis for a true community. So, John Rawls' theory of justice and fairness provides us hope and optimism. And who will do that? Who will practice that? We as a people. And hope and I hope that this pandemic will make us realize that we need to be fair. Okay, and if inequality persists, it should be allowed only if it will benefit the least advantage, the most affected people. So, thank you very much for listening. Stay safe and God bless.